Welcome to Produce Talks.
This whole business is based on relationship and friendships.
Food is darn simple.
What can we do? What are other countries doing?
How important it is for industry to be talking about this.
We're going back to the farm. We're going back to the whole food.
CPMA would like to acknowledge Nature Fresh Farms as a sponsor of this podcast. You can find more information about Nature Fresh Farms at www.naturefresh.ca. And you can keep up with them on Instagram or Twitter at nature_fresh and at Pinterest at naturefresh, along with other social media. CPMA would also like to welcome Fresh from Florida as a sponsor of this podcast. Here is a quick message from Chef Justin of Fresh from Florida.
Hi, I'm Chef Justin Timoneri, Executive Chef with Fresh from Florida, a proud sponsor of this podcast. Fresh from Florida loves being a part of CPMA and sharing the message of what Florida farmers bring to the table. To learn more and to find hundreds of Florida fresh recipes that we develop for you in our test kitchen, visit followfreshfromflorida.com and follow us on Instagram and Facebook at Fresh from Florida. Enjoy the show and keep cooking.
Today, we discuss sustainable produce packaging. We hear a real-world innovative solution from a company who use their technology to protect cucumbers and don't use any plastic or paper in their packaging. Here to lead the discussion is Danielle Duguay, CPMA's packaging specialist and coordinator for the pilot project developing sustainable packaging guides for the food and produce industry.
Thanks, Wally. So welcome to the CPMA podcast series. We are very pleased to have some of the produce industry's leading thinkers with us today to talk about innovative sustainable packaging for fresh produce. On this podcast, we'll be learning about an innovative sustainable packaging, which is generating a lot of interest and driving a broader discussion about what is possible in sustainable produce packaging. Sustainable produce packaging is top of mind for many in the produce industry. It's a complex landscape due to the growing array of sustainable packaging options being available, each of which need to be assessed against a various array of packaging considerations, including economic, social, and environmental considerations, notably mitigating the impacts of plastics on the environment, which is driving our discussion today. Consequently, significant packaging innovation is emerging across the many sustainable options, ranging from direct elimination or minimization of packaging, adopting reusable formats, incorporating recycled content into existing packaging, designing for recyclability, or adopting alternative packaging materials. Today's podcast will showcase an innovation which is getting lots of attention, the elimination of plastics wrap on cucumbers by way of innovative coatings. A leader in this field is Apeel. Today, we are joined by three industry experts who will share their insights on the Apeel innovation and what it can teach us about identifying, validating, and adopting sustainable packaging in today's produce market. We are pleased to have with us today Colton Moore, Commercial Director at Apeel. Based in Colorado, Colton is on the front line of Apeel's efforts to introduce innovative packaging solutions to the produce sector. Joseph Talbourdet, Director of Marketing and Business Development at Topline Farms. Joseph has been in the produce industry for over 30 years and brings a wealth of insight from his years at Loblaw and now Topline. And thirdly, Dan Branson, Senior Director, Product and Business Development at Mucci Farms. A CPMA board member, Dan brings over 35 years of produce industry experience at the retail and production stages to today's call. So with that, today's podcast will have two parts. The first focusing on Apeel's packaging innovation, following which we'll have a broader discussion on what is driving packaging innovation today. So to kick off our focus on the Apeel innovation, I'd like to invite Colton and Joseph to speak to their experience in bringing Apeel to the market. So Colton, starting with you, what was the moment or the incentive or the trigger that led to the development of Apeel's innovative solution?
Yeah, thanks, Daniel. So with regard to Apeel for cucumbers, and in this case, the removal of plastic from those cucumbers, really the challenge was the cucumber itself is limited in some biological ways, right? So a cucumber is, let's say, 95% water or so. And as soon as you harvest that cucumber, it comes off the vine, that water wants to effectively dump out of the product. So Apeel thought, well, that's something maybe we could help with. And we noticed, the plastic is on there to keep the product fresher longer. And it's been that way for 30 years. So we thought that's the opportunity here. What if we could take the plastic off of the cucumber and replace it with something that's plant-based, edible, naturally derived, that would allow the product to stay fresh just as long as the plastic, but without the need for the single-use plastic.
Thank you, Colton. So building on that, what was the leading challenge in going from sort of that concept to validating it to basically deploying it in the market?
Yeah. So from Apeel's side, we were excited to make this change and introduce the world's first plastic-free, or at least in North America, plastic-free English cucumber. But in doing so, we thought, even if we can technologically solve that problem and bring it to market, what will the consumer think? They've been used to buying this commodity in plastic for over 30 years. What happens when suddenly they're in the produce aisle and there it is in front of them without any plastic? What will they think? What questions will they have? So how do we communicate that this change is intentional? What can we say about why this change is possible? And what feedback can we get around, is this something that the consumer will be excited about? And that's the work that we set out to do with Topline and our retail partners in launching this product.
So Joseph, being on the receiving end of that technology and sort of being at the interface with the consumer, what was your experience again in that adoption of this technology?
Well, this actually started back when Dan and I were still with Loblaw, and during an NKO or national kickoff, Gale and Weston stood up and held up a 3-count cucumber, which is one of our club size packs, and said, this is the worst product in produce for plastic. It's 3 cucumbers. So the cucumber's wrapped in plastic. There's an outer wrap of plastic, and the label was made of plastic. So we called it the triple wrap. So needless to say, the race was on when the chairman of the company stands up and says, you have the worst product in produce. So over the next few years, we tried different solutions. We tried taking the plastic off the internal 3-count cucumber and just overwrapping it and shipping it as that. And then Colton introduced himself, and I saw the innovation, and I saw the ability to produce a fresh looking product that would also do exactly what the plastic is doing, is maintaining the freshness of the cucumber. So it was started with Gale and Weston standing up telling us we have the worst product ever. Then when I went into the growing side of the business, we decided to work with Apeel. It's been almost a 2-year process to get to where we're at right now with commercial viability, but it was something that I saw that could work in this specific solution, which was removing single-use plastic from the English cucumber.
Thanks, Joseph. Given that initial success, and I'd like to bring Dan Branson again into this part of the discussion as we start to understand a bit more the impact that this is having on the market. What are you seeing, and this is to all three of you, what are you seeing in terms of how the market is responding to the innovation, either from produce vendors, from customers, from consumers, even from governments, in terms of this innovation and how it's being welcomed, received, types of questions it's generating, et cetera? So maybe starting with Colton, Joseph, and Dan.
Yeah. So in launching this and bringing it to market with Topline this past year, we had the opportunity to ask consumers that purchased Apeel cucumbers in store what they thought, what was their experience. And we did some pretty in-depth studying with our market partners. What we found was that roughly 90% of folks that had purchased an Apeel cucumber were enthusiastic to repurchase and loved the change and were very open and receptive to the technology and how it was being applied. That was an incredible insight that we were happy to see. Further, more than half of the folks that purchased Apeel from the retail partner that they were purchasing from had perceived the retailer in a more positive light afterwards, thinking that this is very welcome, this change. And I think that the retailer now is more, I know that they're more interested in actually impacting kind of their ESG goals and sustainability as a priority. So that was another really interesting finding, that there is a positive effect on the retail perception as well. So yeah, that's been what we've seen from the consumer side.
Thanks, Colton. How about you, Joseph?
The main thing that we noticed was when we announced that we were actually about to go live with commercial viability, and we did a press release, we had feedback from CBC in Canada, CTV in Canada came to our facility to create content and show the world that there is a viable solution to one of, the buzzword of the moment is, single-use plastics. And you're seeing that with the straws, you're seeing that with the bags at retail. And it's just one of the small tools that retailers will be able to use to say that they're trying to create a sustainable product and issue a fresh product that's not wrapped in plastic. So lots of high-level attention has been drawn right across North America. Each one of our trade shows where we feature it as a new item showcase and or at our booth, incredible responses from all retailers. The one thing I do want to say is that everyone's kind of waiting for that very first, what I call the snowball to go down the hill to start the big race. And I can actually say right now that we've signed our first major retailer to go forward with this product. It's been about 7 months in the making, but we're moving forward commercial viability across their DCs and all their stores starting early next year.
Well, that's exciting, Joseph. Congratulations.
Thank you.
How about you, Dan? As someone who's been in the industry, but again, maybe been watching this development more as an observer, what have you observed in terms of how the market and the industry is responding to this innovation?
I think concerns around plastic packaging and packaging in general have really come to a head over the last 5 years, especially. And, there's been a lot of innovation that's been brought to market. There's been a lot of confusion, I think, both at the supplier level, at the retail level, and with the consumer. And at the end of the day, we need to try new things. We need to get new things out there. And the consumer is going to be the person who's going to judge us on this. There are some times when we talk about innovation, there's small changes and there's big changes in innovation. And a small change can be changing a packaging, as for example, from expanded polystyrene to a recycled PET product. And really, you're not changing a lot for a consumer in that regard. It's still packaged. It just looks a little bit different. With Apeel, what you're doing is you're actually removing the plastic in the way that somebody has bought something for many, many years. And I really applaud in many regards that people get out there and try something new, really put something different in front of the consumer and let them vote as to where they see value in this and how they feel about it at the end of the day. And again, I think with many of us, I'm just really looking forward to seeing what the results are that come from these sort of test studies and how innovation is able to scale up.
Good point, Dan. Thank you. I think the last question before we maybe have a broader discussion on packaging innovation in general, maybe starting with Colton on this one. What is the future for Apeel's packaging innovation? Obviously, cucumbers is sort of the go-to-market strategy, so to speak. But can you speak a bit to where you see this technology having broader application and possibly bringing equivalent impacts to other parts of the produce sector?
Certainly. So Apeel, while we're in market for long English cucumbers in North America only right now through Topline in Canada, we've been in market in the North American market in other commodities such as avocados, limes, apples for a few years and have had really great success in the North American market across those commodities as well. Not to mention our presence in the European market with citrus and avocados. So we've got a lot of, commercial success over the past 3 years. And I think what it means for the cucumber product is really just a matter of validating that, to Dan's point, consumers are going to vote positively, that this change is coming and then expanding from there. So we're really excited to see where it goes.
That's great. Thanks, Colton. So maybe with that, what I'd like to do is take this conversation for the second half of this podcast, just more to a broader discussion around packaging innovation, because I think, again, the Apeel example is one where there's some, again, important innovation. I think, as you've already mentioned, there's some important disruption to what was already there, what consumers have been used to. So building on this discussion to this point, I'd like to pick up on a sort of a set of questions regarding the challenge of identifying, validating, and ultimately adopting sustainable packaging solutions. Because I think the Apeel example is one that demonstrates that you kind of got those stages right. So I'd like to open up a broader discussion with the three of you around, let's say, starting with options identification. Because today, I think we would all agree, there's a very wide array of sustainable packaging options on the market. And I mentioned them earlier. And again, the Apeel example being one of elimination is a good example. But there's also a very exciting innovation in terms of reuse, recycled content, design for recyclability, and even substitution. What are your thoughts or your perspective on, given that wide array of options, how can the industry best identify what is possible in terms of sustainable packaging options today? What's been your experience in assessing those options effectively? Maybe starting with Joseph.
The main thing you have to remember when you're trying to change the way that we're currently doing things is there's good plastic and bad plastic. We need the ability to maintain freshness. You want to keep the product as long at the consumer level. And all of that has been, leaps and bounds from when I first started in the produce industry to today, that products last longer when they are shipped in some form of packaging. Now, there's good packaging and bad packaging, and we got to work towards having fully recyclable packaging that we recycle within the country that it's being shipped to, obviously. If you look back to the numbers, I don't think we've done more than 10% of everything ever created that's recyclable has actually been recycled, whereas going forward, we want to increase that number. So, and then you got to look at the costing differences, right? Because people want to save the planet, but not everybody wants to pay to save the planet. So you have to look at the aspect of what the cost per unit will change for the consumer and who's going to absorb that change. Is it the grower? Is it the retailer? Or is it the consumer at the end that's going to pay the little extra? And in some cases, though, with some of the packaging that's being offered out there, it's quite a substantial change in cost. It's a great product. However, the cost makes it unfeasible because, for the person that's not doing the sustainable packaging, their retail's at $99 and you'd have to be at $199 to cover the cost of the perfect packaging. So you have to weigh both sides and get some back pressure to have the world change so that everyone wants it to change and cover it that way.
Thanks, Joseph. So maybe Dan, your thoughts in terms of, you see a lot of different options and innovations out there. How do you weed through that and sort of identify what are the good ones to sort of pursue?
Well, I think it's a number of things. I think Joe really touched on some of them, but what I think about is that the first thing that you need to do is you need to set the goalposts. You need to talk to what are the materials that we want to be using in the market as opposed to which ones we don't want to be using. And I think that between CPMA, Canada Plastics Pact, Pact Global, and other organizations with the Golden Design Rules, I think that we're moving down that path, although I think that there's a lot more work to be done. We live in a time of right now of where inflation is something that's really sensitive to everybody, not just the consumer. You think as a primary supplier and grower, we're all experiencing significant cost increases and inflation of all of the inputs that go into our business. And there's a desire to pass them on, but it's limited in terms of how we can do that. And it's creating challenges within our industry. And to the point that packaging costs more money, at some point there's a very limited amount of that we can absorb. And it goes down the path of really at the end of the day, if this is important to the consumer, are they willing to pay for it? And I think that that's something that we need to understand. Expanded polystyrene to PET has been a massive cost impact to move into a high valued recycled material. There's a lot more to be done, not only in produce, but across a total grocery store. And so we need to think about those. And also, as you start bringing in innovation, you start talking to the investment in equipment and machinery that goes on and repurposing floor space in a primary supplier as well. And we need to, it's something of where when I go back to an innovation, I have really mixed feelings about something. Well, we're going to try this innovation besides something comparable, or turning around and saying, I have a point of view that this is the right thing to do for the market, and I'm going to invest my program into it, because we want to see is that if we're going to invest in equipment and things like that to do it, I think that there's going to be a general willingness to consider that. But what we want to have is a long-term commitment to that. So if we're buying equipment and machinery, there's an ROI that we can map out.
Good points, Dan. I think you both sort of spoke to the challenge, and not just when identifying options, is to very quickly validate them. What impacts will they have? What cost impacts will they have, et cetera? Points that you've sort of just recently spoke to. So maybe I'll finish with the last question, which is, again, for the three of you around, the market adoption side. So what does the industry, and when I say industry, I think the players overall need to get right, quote unquote, when adopting these innovative, sustainable packaging solutions and getting them into the market. And I heard one point, which is, it all comes down to the consumer acceptance. Obviously, you need to get that right. Otherwise, this doesn't kind of go anywhere. There's no traction. But can you maybe just close off on by sharing your thoughts in terms of what are the things that, at the end of the day, the 1 yard line, you need to know you're getting right for a solution like this to get across and to really start to have the kind of impact and benefit that we're seeking. So maybe Joseph, if you can start us on that.
I would start it out as it's the story that the retailer wants to tell their consumers. Back when we were buyers, Dan and I, we would have things sent to us and brought to us. But if it wasn't going to be part of our messaging, we would not want to deal with it. Compostable versus recyclable versus, all the buzzwords. Mm-hmm. It's what the retailer is going to for the next 3 to 5 years or even a 10-year plan. What is their story going to be to move the industry away from the easy right now? Because right now a foam tray is like a third of a penny, but an rPET is 3 cents a tray. But it's worth the investment because it's not going to the landfills. It's always, in Westmoreland, we always say the retailer leads the way. They tell us their story, and then we'll develop and help them develop going forward.
Thanks, Joseph. How about you, Dan?
I think that something that's key is that there's a side to packaging, that packaging can't be a competitive advantage at the end of the day. It's got to be table stakes efficiencies for the industry. So if we're going to be packing a mini cucumber or things like this, let's really limit it into some level of consistency across retail and the supply channel to create efficiencies. And we'll figure out our competitive advantages outside of that. I think that the other piece that really comes into it for me, and I think that it is part of where Joe is going with this, is that the retailer is really going to be the gatekeeper to the consumer at the end of the day. They're going to be the storyteller. So we're all going to be listening to what does the retailer want us to do? And what direction are they going to point us in? And let's follow that. But in the background, as we in the industry, I think that what we need to be doing to support that is that we need to take this time to educate ourselves as much as possible about all of the different materials, about the benefits of those materials, about how they work with the product that we're packaging. And in that regard, we don't want to create a food waste problem where we're solving a plastics problem or a packaging problem. So if you take the time to do the research of all of the materials that are out there and how it can impact, you're going to make those conversations with your retailer a lot more efficient. You're going to be able to give them information that's going to be able to help point them in the right direction and optimize what they're doing. And you're going to set yourself up as a producer to succeed and to be able to sort of broaden that into industry conversations. It's something where specific industries that pack certain items are looking at it and saying, these are the right ways to do it for us. These are going to be the most efficient, cost effective. These are the right materials that we're giving advice to so that we're creating efficiencies for our industry again as well.
All right. Thanks, Dan. Maybe Colton, again, on this last question, as a supplier of innovative, sustainable packaging solutions, where do you see the role Apeel plays? And again, in helping the industry, the retailer, the growers, et cetera, again, get this right when they're looking at sustainable solutions?
Yeah, I think Dan actually set up an interesting framework, which is the trade-off between being able to create something that's more sustainable in the offering without increasing either cost to an unsustainable point or food waste going up. And Apeel's role in the industry is to give that option to our suppliers and to our retail partners, one that doesn't increase food waste, isn't cost prohibitive, but does enable a longer shelf life through the supply chain at shelf and, of course, at home with the consumer. That's our goal.
Thank you, Colton. So thank you to all of you. Today's discussion, I think, really illustrates this growing portfolio of sustainable packaging options. When combined with that array of sustainability considerations that need to be addressed, leads to some very complex decision-making, which, as I think Colton, you mentioned, or Dan, you framed, involve the managing of really important and challenging trade-offs. So innovation, I think, is increasingly required to help strike that balance. So I think today was a good example of that, where, again, Apeel has demonstrated, some true innovation is possible when it comes to sustainable packaging for fresh produce. I'd also offer, I think, that Apeel's success story is a template for how others can explore and validate, and ultimately, bring innovative packaging technologies to market. So thanks for sharing your insights today. The complexity, I think, of innovative, sustainable packaging was clearly highlighted during our podcast today. Thank you again to Colton, to Joseph, to Dan for your deep insights. I know many listening to this podcast will take away some valuable insights and guidance as they explore their own journey in adopting sustainable packaging. So thank you for that. And I guess with that, we'll close today's discussion. And thank you to listening to the CPMA podcast series.
Thanks again to Daniel Duguay, Dan Branson, Colton Moore, and Joe Talbourdet for your knowledge and experience. Until next time, fill half your plate with fruits and veggies, continue to seek out new knowledge, and basically never stop growing.